Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you to the latest edition of Grenzebach Gleer and Associates Thought Leadership Series. Today, we are joined by about 130, 35 and climbing advancement professionals. Registrations exceeded 300 people from 6 different continents, believe it or not, 13 different countries and more than 30 states. It seems like our topic, advancement benchmarking in independent schools, what should we measure and why, is popular. And my guests and colleagues can't wait to share this experience with you. Welcome, everyone. I'm so pleased you're joining us. GGNA's first client in 1961 was an independent school. And over the past 60 years, we have served hundreds of school clients, 9 through 12, K through 12, K to 5, K to 8, religious and secular, co-ed and single sex in the US and around the world. 6 decades later, we partner with about 30 independent schools annually to help them achieve substantial, sustainable fundraising growth. Today's webinar is about benchmarking in independent school fundraising. We'll be talking about what to measure, why it's important, and how to measure it. For our conversation, I'm joined today by 2 independent school fundraising experts. First, GGNA Senior Vice President Mary Carrasco is an independent school alumna, parent of alumni, and former trustee. Among many other credentials, Mary led 9-figure campaigns at both Mercersburg Academy and Sidwell Friends School. She's a former board member of CASE and a CASE laureate, meaning she's volunteered for CASE for decades. And Mary is the 2019 recipient of CASE's prestigious Robert Bell Crow Memorial Award, the highest honor for an independent school advancement professional. Ann Snyder, who is also an independent school alumna, is Senior Director, Communities Engagement at CASE. Prior to joining CASE, she was Director of External Affairs at Stuart Hall School. In her role at CASE, Ann serves as the industry insider, expert, and thought leader for independent schools globally. She collaborates with NAIS, regional associations throughout the United States, the Canadian Association of Independent Schools, and the Association of American Schools in South America, just to name a few. As for me, my name is Liz Farr. I too am an independent school alumna and had a 27-year career in 7 different independent schools before joining GGNA 5 years ago. Today, I'm honored to lead GGNA's independent schools practice, which means I lead the team that works with all of our independent school clients. Before we get to the discussion, I have a quick announcement. Although we have prepared lots of topics and questions for one another, if time permits, we're also open to answering some questions from the audience. If you'd like to ask a question, please use the Q&A button on the Zoom screen, and please accept our apologies if we can't get to any or all of them. So Ann, Mary, and I have arranged to sort of have just an organic discussion. We have some topics that we want to share with you and talk about, but we're going to lead it off with a somewhat provocative topic, and that is, what are we accustomed to measuring in independent schools, ladies? But we shouldn't be. It doesn't really matter. What should we stop measuring? Mary.
Any kind of percentage of participation. Doesn't correlate.
Hallelujah.
Doesn't correlate to dollars. I mean, we need to be focused on how we get new dollars and new donors.
And what would you add?
Well, I second that wholeheartedly. I want to officially declare that the age of participation is over. So thank you, Mary, for that. I would also say the biggest mistake schools often make is measuring yourself against your closest admission competitor. While they might have a similar academic profile to you or sports teams that are competitive against yours, I think boards often get distracted with what the school down the street is doing, and they may or may not have anything to do with your school from a philanthropic benchmarking perspective. So stop looking at the school across the street. They may or may not have anything to say about what your philanthropy program can do.
Yeah. Well, I, of course, agree with both of you. That's why we're on this webinar together. I would say that board participation, hitting 100% of your board members, And I'm seeing the nod, the knowing nod. Yes, of course, 100% of your board members should be supporting your school. So I do think it's valuable to track that, and just track that against yourself. I mean, that I would hope that your peer, quote unquote, peer schools are also hitting that mark. We did get a couple of questions about faculty and staff participation, and whether that's valuable to track. I think it's valuable to ask faculty and staff to participate in annual giving and give them the opportunity to show their support and enthusiasm for the school. But I actually don't think it's particularly valuable to track faculty and staff participation. So now that we've disabused everybody of that, of the participation bugaboo, what should we be tracking? If each of us wants to share 2 or 3 key data points that we think are the most important and most valuable to measure, what would they be and why?
Liz, can I jump in with just one quick
Yes.
thing that'll help frame this question too?
Yeah.
I've been thinking a lot lately about the difference between data which is indicative of something going on in your program or data which is predictive of what your outcomes are likely to be. So when we think about participation, I think of it as an indication of something. Most likely an alumni participation percentage is indicative of how strong your program was 20, 30 years ago when your alums were there. Your parent participation might be indicative of how happy parents are with the school or some level of your culture of philanthropy, but it's not predictive of what will happen in coming campaigns, in next year's annual fund, or any of that. Board participation, by contrast, is somewhat predictive, because if the board is on board, that was poorly stated, but you know what I mean? If the board is all in, they are leaders in your community who are in fact influencing other gifts and hopefully going on asks with you, et cetera. And so that is a different measure. So when we think about the things we should be measuring, largely, I think what we need to be paying attention to are things that are predictive, but I'll let my other colleagues talk a little bit about those as well.
Well, and it's, you know, if you think about measurements as what you're dedicating resources to, excuse me, that helps in defining what those measurements should be. What are you dedicating resources to? That doesn't mean you don't know the other numbers, and that doesn't mean that from time to time other numbers aren't useful, but what are you dedicating resources to? And so I think then what we have to consider is, how are you measuring progress towards your goals, right? And so I would say what we should be measuring is the progress as a percentage towards goal over time. So at this point last year, what percentage were we towards our goal? Because if you're going to look at that over time, you should be tracking at least at that level, if not a little bit ahead. So that would be very helpful in terms of knowing where to put your efforts, where to put your resources. I think new commitments and new cash always have to be measured. And then the number of qualified prospective major gift donors. I'll speak more about major gifts a little bit later, but if you think about the pipeline towards those gifts that are going to have the greatest impact on the school, then that's where you want to dedicate your resources. So who among your Libons have given or not given yet? New leadership donors, and how many conversations have you had with individuals who may be able to consider a major gift, and you've qualified that this is the right timing and they have interest in that goal?
Yeah. I think also you touched on it in passing, Mary, in donor retention, donor upgrades, donor acquisition, 3 key benchmarks against your own program, not against others, but just against your own program, that can help you, as Anne wisely pointed out, predict what's our future fundraising if we are gaining donors each year and holding on to most donors and managing to upgrade those we have. I think that That's something that often we overlook. And keep it back to the just to beat on the participation drum a little more. You cannot control what the denominator is. And in fact, we've all gotten better at finding lost alums. We're graduating classes that are larger than the ones 30 years ago, et cetera. So stop measuring what you can't control and start measuring what you actually can, exercise control over. You might not be able to control it entirely. I think in major gifts, the number of qualifications, the number of proposals sent, the number of visits per month, per quarter, per year, all very valuable to track, excuse me. But I think it comes right down to dollars. Measure dollars. Dollars pay bills. Dollars are what your institution needs. And participation does not pay bills. Donor numbers don't pay bills. Dollars pay bills.
Yeah. There is a great question in the chat about participation, so I just want to bring this to our attention.
Awesome.
Ashley asked, but what if parents are motivated by participation? Then go for it. You got to use every tool in your toolbox. If parents are motivated by it, then use it. We're not saying you shouldn't pay attention. I think it was Mary who said you still know what those numbers are. I think the difference in participation is thinking of just because you have 80% participation doesn't necessarily mean that helps you meet your goals. So while it might be useful in a certain context, it's not necessarily data that's meaningful for you as the person in charge of philanthropy or your school. It can be a tool, but that doesn't mean that it's the be all end all.
And I think we can re-educate towards acquisition, retention, and reactivation rather than percentage of participation, which is just almost like too easy. If we talk to our volunteers about acquiring new donors in their class, retaining the donors that have given before, and reactivating past donors, that's going to be more productive.
Yeah. And Ashley, I would also say, back to Ashley's questions about what if parents are motivated, re-educate them, help them understand what matters. I would put the board in the same group. The reason your board cares about participation is because we've been feeding them participation numbers and telling them to care about it for decades. If we stop telling them to care about it and start caring about things like dollars, donor acquisition, major gifts visits, qualified prospects, et cetera, that's what they will start caring about. So recognize our own, our own sort of complicit behavior in creating things that then are not productive. So Anne, sorry, you didn't get to mention your 3 key data points or what things you think we should be measuring.
Well, I would echo what you all have said already. Obviously, the most important that you can do is who are you upgrading? What money do you have in the pipeline? What money are you likely to bring in to meet your goal? And in addition to that, what I would just flag for schools right now is to think through the story of what soft credits are telling you about your school and your donors. We have seen donor advised funds go through the roof in the last 10 years, at a far greater rate than any other giving source. But behind donor advised funds, much like family foundations, there are individuals that you have worked with. And so obviously they are advising as to where the gift goes. So there is an increased need to look at what story our soft credits are telling us about where those gifts are truly coming from. Because without looking at that, you're not going to see the full picture. And we'll get to how that could work within the DASL case framework in a little while as well. There is one more question.
I saw it too, Anne. Go for it.
One more question about what if a high net worth individual or foundation wants to know how much your alumni are helping to meet goals, because that will influence the gift they ultimately give. Just to echo what Liz said, they are generally asking that question because they've been trained to ask that question. So go ahead and answer the question and then use that as an opportunity to point to other data points that actually underpin the strength of your philanthropic program, is what I would say.
And to be clear, we're not suggesting that you don't keep track of participation. We're fine, but don't benchmark it against other institutions. Don't report it to your board. Don't report it in faculty meetings, that kind of, don't advertise it, but keep track of it. But also understand it's a numerator over a denominator. So it's important to keep track of those two numbers year to year as well.
Exactly.
So our next topic was, I can tell all of our attendees are like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize this was going to be so controversial. So our next topic is about against whom should we be benchmarking? How do we identify a peer set? How do we know whom we should be comparing ourselves to? And I will say, and I'll turn it over to Mary and Ann, but I will say, I think the most important program to benchmark yourself against is your own. It is your prior year's giving. Are you increasing each year the dollars you're raising, the number of major gifts prospects you have in the pipeline, the number of planned gift intentions you're securing, your annual fund dollars, your annual fund donors, the breadth of endowed funds that you have at your school? These are the kinds of things that I think too frequently we don't reflect on our own program and measure and celebrate our success in growing these things because we're too busy looking at another school that might not have at all the same circumstances. And we're either beating ourselves up about or feeling good about our program because it compares favorably or poorly to another program, but start first with yourselves. That's my.
That's such important advice, Liz, because I've been the beneficiary at a school that kept data for over 20 years, and it was so impactful. And if your school doesn't already do that, be the staff that starts keeping that data and keep it consistently, keep the definitions so that future successors know what you were tracking and can take advantage of that. The other thing I would say is that you have to know which schools have similar fundraising conditions as you have to really appropriately benchmark. And I think Anne will give us some tips on that. But for benchmarking with peers to be useful, it has to also be predictive of results, right? We've talked about that. So things that we don't always do that are really useful are keeping data per student, right? Like endowment per student or new cash, new commitments per student. And that's also a measurement that the CASE Independent School Fundraising Awards Committee uses. It's a nice way to know if your conditions are similar. The other things to know, to be able to explain to trustees or others when they question why is the school down the street raising more money or not as much money as you are, it's knowing how they're counting and what they're counting, right? And you can do that with conversations with your peers, knowing if they're in a campaign or not, knowing if they're putting unrestricted gifts into current operations or holding it separately. Those are the kinds of pieces of information that will really make your benchmarking much more useful.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Mary. I will also say the reason to benchmark ourselves against anyone else, as has been indicated already, is not necessarily just because we are competitive individuals, although I've never met anyone in advancement who's not personally competitive with other people. We're very goal-oriented as a crew. The reason to benchmark against similar institutions is to learn from them so that if their conditions are similar and they unlocked the secret of young alumni fundraising, because you do not compete in that space, you want to learn what their secrets were, given that your schools are so similar. Perhaps the same thing could work for you. So CASE has a very easy way to do that. And many, if not most of you on this call right now from independent schools are also CASE members. If you fill out our DASL, the advancement section of the DASL platform through NAIS, through which CASE is partnering this year. So we've moved away from the VSE for schools and we are now only collecting foundation data from schools and fundraising data from schools through DASL in the United States. If you're filling that out and you are a CASE member, that data will go into what we call Data Miner. That's our reporting platform, and will produce a graphical program summary by the time the data is scrubbed and available for FY22, which will happen sometime this coming spring, during the spring of FY23. That data will be presented to you in a graphical way and will show you who your closest 5 peer institutions are based on the type of thing that Mary was just saying. We use endowment per student. We use day and boarding. We use what gender your school is, what's your total financial operations cost, advancement expenditures, all sorts of points that feed into a proprietary algorithm. And the best part is you can right click on those graphics and plug them right into a PowerPoint presentation for your board. So that if you see who those top 5
Pause on that, Anne.
Right,
say that again, because I think our listeners need to hear that,
Sure.
and how easy you have made it for them to deploy this information.
I am happy to. If you are a case member and you fill out DASL, you will be able to, through a 2-click process, determine who your closest 5 peer institutions are based on a proprietary algorithm produced by case experts that look at all those same data points that Mary and Liz have been discussing today. Which means you can log on and see that the school down the street might not be on there, but there's a school in Ohio that you've only vaguely heard of who has the exact same amount of legally contactable alumni and endowment per student. And perhaps they ran a campaign that doubled their goal within 5 years. That's the type of person that you want to then pick up the phone and say, could you lend me the secret to your special sauce? So that is why we created those. And so that you can easily pull those reports into PowerPoint for your board presentation, so that you're not looking just at participation or what your closest admission competitor did. You are looking at hard data of institutions like yours, and then you can reasonably answer questions about how you might get from point A to point B in your next campaign, because you're already in conversation with some other schools that have benefited from years of wisdom of other institutions as well.
Thank you, Anne.
Yeah, thank you.
Do you, Anne, shall we show your slide with all the links?
That sounds great.
Okay, so Damien will put up the slide, and anybody who's attending, you can click on these links now, or we always post the recording of webinars, so you'll be able, don't fear losing access to this. And Damien has put the links also in the chat for everybody to access them.
And if all else fails, Google case.org and DASL, and we've got a whole webpage that'll pop up for you with these same instructions. The reason we are showing this to you today is that many of our offices are used to entering data through one platform or another. Some use the VSE, some use DASL in the past, some use Index. It's all over the map. Most schools do participate in the DASL survey. That's why we partnered with NAIS this year to align those data points to our global reporting standard. So it is the absolute gold standard of data collection in educational philanthropy for schools worldwide, bar none, full stop. That's really good news for you. And everyone, regardless of whether or not you're a case member, has access to that and to the case reporting, global reporting standards for free. The reason we're showing this to you today is because NAIS and the DASL team made a determination several years ago for the purpose of streamlining communication, that the head of school and the chief business officer could determine which members of the team at your school have access to input data directly, or to view the data set and the questions. Not every school gives their advancement office direct access. So if you've never seen this before, that is not a case decision and it is not an NAIS decision, who gets what. It is a school-specific decision. So go and talk to your head or your chief business officer and request access, because some of these questions are quite different than the way that we used to count through DASL. And only those who are well-versed in advancement are going to be able to answer those questions. Now, even those who are well-versed still have a hard time, because we are counting with a new lens. We are looking at funds received, so any cash in the door for this specific fiscal year that we're looking at, and new funds committed, so pledges, bequest intentions, etc. All of that kind of thing is going to be looking at that through that framework, so that you can measure what's come in and the activity and intention and effort it takes to raise money into the future. So by all means, please, please, please go click on those resources. The deadline to submit data is October 14th, so it's coming up. I did get a question from an old seasoned pro who said, what if we can't answer every single one of these questions? Is it still worth it? And the answer is absolutely. Answer the ones that you can answer confidently. There are many that are optional. There are some that are required, but answer anything you can in its entirety. And if you're not sure, don't put bad data in there. Just answer what you can, and then we are committed to working with schools for year 2 to ensuring that everyone's able to answer those questions. Thanks for that, Liz.
Yeah, and a good question in the Q&A worthy of addressing right now. If the advancement department completes their section of the DASL survey, but the other offices, admissions, business, et cetera, don't complete theirs, will the advancement department still have access to the advancement numbers?
Yes, as far as I know, that you will still have access. Absolutely.
Right, great question. Okay, so we're at 1:26, but Anne, Mary, and I are just going to keep going. So another thing we talked about, how can we stop, and we touched on this, but let's go a little deeper. How can we stop board members from caring about what the school down the street or across town is doing, how many people attended that school's auction, et cetera? How do we stop them from caring about the wrong things when those things are not relevant to what we're doing?
Give them data that is relevant to your fundraising results and be able to connect the dots for them, show them how this data predicts fundraising results, and then do it consistently. Don't do it just once a year. Keep doing it consistently.
Yeah. And I think educating them about why we're telling them what we're telling them, why we're reporting out on specific things, why we're not reporting out on other things. I worked for a good period of time for a girls' school that had gone co-ed. We were constantly being compared to the boys' school that was, a couple of miles away. And we felt like we were punching above our weight, as it were, for the prospect pool we had, our track record of giving. But board members were constantly asking, well, why are we not raising as much as X school? So I think you have to help your board members understand our prospect pool is not the same as their prospect pool. We are raising money from a finite group of people that are our alumni, our parents, our past parents, et cetera. I think also, to put a fine point on board members, there are sort of widely accepted rules of thumb about how much the board itself should be giving. There's something interesting to benchmark, right? What do you want to know why the school down the street is raising more money? Because their board is contributing 30% of their annual fund each year, and our board is contributing 20%. So help them understand the role they play in fundraising success as well. And what would you add?
Well, to build upon what you just said too, in terms of educating your volunteers about what's important. One thing we look at in the CASE Educational Fundraising Awards too is what percentage of your overall cash in hand is contributed by your top 12 donors or even your top 3 donors. So if in the context of the boys' school down the street happens to have the air of, I don't know, maybe they have a Walton family connection or some huge scale donor, they might be bringing in 25 million in annual and capital that year. But if 15 million of that is from a single donor, that's going to skew the data. And so that's the type of thing that you want to continually draw your board's attention to. If your philanthropic program has breadth and depth, that is more sustainable over time in many cases than the efforts of a single donor in a shorter period. So that's another thing that I would really pay attention to and educate your board about needing to continue to track.
Yeah.
And I think that leads also to engagement. I mean, we were talking about really major gifts as the hub of the wheel from which everything, the advancement program comes from. And so if you can educate your board about the major gift pipeline and how you need to engage prospective donors who may become annual fund leadership donors and then major gift prospective major gift donors, then that will do a lot to educate your board about the importance of engagement and also about the process of soliciting leadership and major gifts.
We have a we have a question in the Q&A about what are the percentages that board members should be giving. So my first smarmy response is more than they did last year. Right. Don't worry so much about, industry, high performing programs in independent schools, 20 to 30% of the annual fund should be coming from board members, 30 to 40% of a campaign. Keep in mind, over the course of a campaign, the board has some churn, new people are joining. But I think what's more important is how are you growing board support at your school year over year? Because if you tell a board that's currently contributing 9% of the annual fund, and you say that's not going to cut it, it has to be 20 to 30%, that may seem like an unattainable goal for them to achieve. And you don't want to beat them up and not give them a pathway. You want to celebrate them adding on each year and giving more each year. What about engagement? How do we measure or benchmark engagement? How should we be measuring or benchmarking engagement? And I'll call on myself first for this one. So I think one of the things we often lose sight of in independent school advancement shops is that engagement is a means to an end. Every member of your advancement team is a fundraiser by definition. And every program, every event, every touch that is qualified as quote unquote engagement should have as its ultimate goal, not just deepening the relationship with the constituent, but deepening their philanthropic relationship with your school. And I think, too often we lose sight and we think engagement for engagement's sake is good. I would say also that engagement, back to Anne's indicative versus predictive, often who are the people who come to your alumni cocktail reception in San Francisco or New York? They are the people who are giving. So is that indicative or is that predictive, right? Are they coming to the reception because they've invested in the school and they want to hear what the school is doing with their philanthropic support? Or are they begging to be more deeply engaged because they want to support the school at higher levels? So ask yourselves those questions. But I would say, it's not just about how many people showed up for a free martini. Mary, what would you say?
Well, I would say the same thing, and also measuring what was the result of the engagement, that just like you said, is it just recent donors who are participating, or is it loyalty donors, consecutive year donors? Knowing that group, and then knowing what is the purpose of the engagement. And then that goes back to the better measurement, which is acquisition, retention, and reactivation.
Mm-hmm.
What are we doing after the engagement to retain and reactivate and acquire new donors? If you have someone at your event who was happy with the interaction, and they haven't been a donor recently, let's make sure to ask them within 2 weeks while they're still feeling happy, while the heart is beating faster.
I would say too that engagement is a matrix. It's not a tally mark. The fact that they drank 3 martinis at the alumni reception is almost irrelevant in and of itself. Our alumni engagement metrics survey at CASE looks at engagement from 4 major standpoints, and I think it's a good rule of thumb for all of us in our practice. We look at philanthropic engagement first and foremost, volunteer engagement, experiential engagement, so showing up to stuff or participating in things, and then communication, opens, clicks, shares, all of that kind of thing. And the reason I like that is because if you think of it as a quadrant, I don't think all the squares within that are actually the same size. I think philanthropic needs to be the biggest one that we look at, but you can't get there without the other pieces. And so they are feeding off of one another. But again, those 4 key components, philanthropic, volunteer, experiential, and communication, they all work together, but again, all in service of their philanthropic engagement to the school.
And Anne, our listeners can find that on CASE's website.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you go to data and research, or I think analytics, I can't remember exactly where it is on our website, but Google alumni engagement metrics CASE, and it will pop right up.
Awesome. Thank you. How should we be measuring staff members' efforts in addition to just the cash that we're receiving? And we had a question submitted in advance that I thought was particularly good about how, if you are the chief advancement officer at your school, how should you be creating buy-in and a sense of ownership among staff members to care about metrics and to care about collecting and analyzing data? Mary, do you want to start?
Yeah. So I really believe that the staff member whose goals you're determining have to be involved in that conversation. They just can't be handed to them. And you have to be able to show that staff member how their personal goals are related to the team's overall goals. If we don't work hard to achieve our individual staff member goals, we can't achieve our overall goals. They have to be tied. And so there has to be an agreement that these are reasonable goals, and reasonable individual goals, and then reasonable team goals. That, and I try to put it in terms of what is maybe 3 levels: easy, challenging, extraordinary, right? So that you're pretty certain you can achieve that first level. With effort, you believe you have confidence to achieve the second level. And then if we're all, hitting home runs and rock stars, we'll hit that extraordinary level. So I think the fact that we're including the staff members in setting the goals, and that we're tying those goals to our overall goals, is what's really important in terms of achieving goals, but also in getting the buy-in.
What would you say, Anne?
I would say too, thinking through the ways that you're calculating their ability to deliver on those goals and showing that you're advocating for them with the head and the board too for additional resources. We all know it takes money to spend money. And I think a team that feels well supported is going to want to work toward those goals much faster than one who isn't, or a team that doesn't feel engaged with that process. So that's the only thing I would add. I think Mary summed it up pretty perfectly. I would say too, if we're thinking through how to get faculty and other staff engaged in the philanthropic process, continually drawing back to the way that as Sheriff Freeman Huffle of Francis Parker School always says this, that the difference between good schools and great schools is philanthropy. So demonstrate to your faculty the difference, that the reason they're a great school and the reason they are enabled to do what they do in the classroom is because of the philanthropy that happens within your school's walls.
Yeah. And I think also that investing in professional development for staff is critical to helping them understand what they should be tracking, developing those sort of senses and habits of mind about collecting data, analyzing data, informing future behavior with data. A key mentor of mine years ago taught me how to use an annual gift pyramid. How are you going to make your goal, Liz? How do you expect to make it if you're only asking 3 people for a $10,000 gift? And that kind of discipline at that point hadn't come naturally to me. So it took a good lesson. And I think it's worthwhile investing in staff who want to perform, want to do well, but may not have the experience of having done that kind of analysis and informing behavior with it. So get them PD.
I think that's so important and important now in this webinar to talk about in terms of major gift metrics, that we have to be very specific. Number of visits isn't a meaningful measurement.
Right.
What is the goal for the visit? What is the purpose? And a lot of staff don't come to that with experience or professional development to know that, right? So really asking for guidance and preparation in terms of what do I need to learn in this visit? How do I qualify someone as a prospective major gift donor that I can give a proposal to in the next 12 months? When am I ready to give a proposal, either orally and writing? Whose participation do I need? Am I successful at getting campus partners, volunteer or staff to join me in cultivating this gift? So really breaking it down so that we know at the end of the year, we will have presented enough proposals, and actually more than enough, to reach the dollar goal that our business office and our campaigns and our community are counting on for us to achieve.
Yeah.
You know, there's a great question in the chat that's very similar to this, and I would love to pose it to you, Liz, and to you, Mary, because of your extensive experience in this area. So what specific wisdom do you have for a new major gifts officer? What should that person be measuring, especially when the school doesn't have an active major giving program, or perhaps is regenerating their major giving program?
Well, I mean, so I was a new major giving officer at one time. And I think it's about it. I hearken back to what Mary said about, easy, advanced, extraordinary. Give that new major gift officer some easily achievable sort of metrics to hit, but also give them support in terms of being able to know what to do in a major gift visit, know what to say, etc. Get them some professional development, some, let them spend time with your fundraising consultant when your fundraising consultant spends the day with you. But I think it also, again, it depends a lot on the portfolio that person is given. Are they being given prospects who have not been contacted by the school in 5 years, or maybe never, have never been visited, or are they inheriting they may be a new major gift officer, but they're inheriting a portfolio from somebody who's just left the institution, who had gotten a bulk of those prospects to a highly cultivated point, and therefore now, proposals should be put in place. I think a lot depends on the quality of and the quantity of the prospects in that portfolio. And I'm not trying to dodge the question. I think it depends on a lot.
Yeah, and I would say ultimately, what a gift officer is trying to learn is what are the problems this donor wants to help solve with their philanthropy. Either society's problems or your school's problems. What is the problem that we want to solve with the philanthropy? And what's the timeline for considering a gift? Those are the two pieces of information that you really need to know to be able to match up their interests and their timing with your priorities and your timeline. Are they going to sell a business? Have they inherited some money? What is happening that they will be able to consider a gift proposal, and what's the purpose of that gift proposal?
Yeah. We are at almost 1:45 Eastern, and we still have 160 people on with us, but why don't we wrap for now? Perhaps this points to a future benchmarking webinar. Same bat channel, same bat time, same guests. And we'd love to do that with everybody in the future. I just want to thank Mary and Anne for participating in this discussion with me. We brainstormed this a month or two ago and thought, wonder if that'd be interesting. And evidently it is. If you'd like to revisit this webinar, know that it will be, it has been recorded, and the recording will be posted on our website. Just go to grensglier.com from our homepage, click on Thought Leadership, and then Past Webinars. I also encourage you to follow Grenzebach Glier and Associates on LinkedIn, connect with Mary and me so that you're made aware of future opportunities to read thought leadership, to attend webinars like this. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and best wishes for a great rest of the week and for a very successful FY23.